Star Wars is my favourite franchise of all time. I went to Star Wars Celebration this year, saw one of the original trilogy films on the big screen, and recently bought a UCS set. I love the franchise so much, but in recent times I'm not sure how much I've loved the stuff Disney has put out. The Bad Batch has its moments, but it's not amazing. Andor is great, but it doesn't feel like Star Wars. Kenobi was a huge letdown upon re-evaluation. The Book of Boba Fett certainly could have been a lot better, and The Mandalorian Season 3 was also a bit of a letdown in my opinion. The last great thing to come out of Star Wars that felt like Star Wars was The Mandalorian Season 2, which was almost 3 years ago now. Not to mention, I was never really a fan of Rebels. It has cool moments, but isn't anything special and can be really kiddie at times. However, Ahsoka looked promising. Ahsoka Tano is one of my favourite characters in the franchise. But did the show live up to the expectations? And did it save the dying interest in a galaxy far, far away? The short answer is no, it did not, unfortunately. And let's talk about why in two sections, the double premiere and the rest of the show. And two things are worth mentioning here. This is my opinion, and I'm not a huge fan of Rebels or majority of the characters. Also, spoilers for Star Wars in general, but mainly Rebels and Ahsoka. For the most part, the 2-episode premiere was enjoyable and watchable, but that's really it. The text crawl at the start was stupid, boring, and most importantly, irrelevant. It was not needed. Not only does it strip the title crawl of anything that made it special in the first place, such as bombastic music or unique and engaging movement, the original crawl moved away, and that is more aesthetically pleasing than it just moving upwards. But most importantly, majority of the exposition it provides is repeated by characters such as Thrawn's return being whispered. That's repeated in the first 2 episodes. Why is it in the title crawl? The map MacGuffin is fine, but almost kind of feels like a repeat of Force Awakens, which was already flawed, because why would Luke leave a map if he didn't want to be found? I think this one makes a bit more sense. Thrawn just happens to be in this other galaxy that the map leads to. However, how the characters know that he is there is beyond me at this point, but the plot is fine. It's a watchable one and doesn't make you want to turn off the show. The acting, it could be worse, but it could also be very better. It is very flat. When Ahsoka is talking to Sabine about their past as master and apprentice, which is a separate problem, it should be an emotional scene. They talk so flatly with no emotion that you don't feel something for them. You don't feel the history that they had. Again, when Ahsoka was talking about walking away from Anakin and then Sabine, it's so flat and boring that makes it seem like she doesn't care, she did those things, and doesn't even have the simplest bit of emotion towards Anakin anymore, which is ridiculous. She cared and trusted him so much in the Clone Wars. If she's not going to show any regret from walking away from her master who cared about her, why should we sympathise with her? Hera bothered me as well with her flat line deliveries. In Rebels, her and Kanan outside of Chopper were probably the best parts of the show. Ezra annoyed me, and Sabine just wasn't my favourite character, and she's still not. And Zeb, I just wasn't really a fan of either. Hera was an interesting character in Rebels. Here, she's really not at all. Her best scene, of course, is the one with Chopper in the first 2 episodes, but other than that, she's a boring character in the premiere episodes, and I hope she does get more interesting. The droids are the only 2 characters with any sort of character, which is weird because they're robots, and that's just because they're funny. Chopper steals that one scene he's mainly in, and Hu Yang has a funny interaction with Sabine.
I have known many Padawans over the centuries, and I can safely say your aptitude for the Force would fall short of them all.
The 2 dark side characters, Baylan and his apprentice, are actually cool. Baylan is like one of the only good characters in the show. I just wish there was more of a separation in their character. He seems wise, but she seems to just obey, which is a bit boring. And to be clear, they're not Sith or Jedi, much like Ahsoka. Like how Ahsoka loiters between the light side, being a grey Jedi, or Ahsoka the White as she becomes later on in the show. They tilt towards the dark, hence the orange but not red sabers. And so I think that they're great opposition for Ahsoka. And finally, the action. I mean, Dave Filoni knows how lightsabers work, so thankfully there's no ridiculous bouncing. The choreography is good too, and it's better than Mando Season 3 and Kenobi, so I'll give it that. Not that it was a high bar to pass, still, it was good, apart from Sabine getting stabbed. Poor Qui-Gon, you really could have lived. Or then again, everyone else probably should have died. There's no way you should survive getting stabbed by a lightsaber that burns at ridiculous heat. All Dave had to do was have Shin thrust Sabine against the wall and use those injuries to write her out of the mission in the next episode. But otherwise, the action is pretty solid. If you're wondering why I covered all this stuff in the premiere episodes, the start of a show often dictates its overall quality, but let's see, shall we? Trying to organise my thoughts on this show is hard, without sounding like I'm complaining for the sake of complaining, because I am forever grateful that an Ahsoka show even exists. But I guess that's the main problem. It doesn't focus on Ahsoka all that much. The arc of her and Sabine being master and apprentice is not prominent enough to be a satisfying arc, and I hate that they tried to give it an end with Sabine using the Force and sticking with Ahsoka in the new galaxy. Sabine even having the Force is stupid because she's Mandalorian, and it takes away from what made Tar Vizsla and the Darksaber special in the first place. And after Hugh Yang's roast in the premiere episodes, Sabine's arc should have been accepting the fact that she isn't Force sensitive and lean back more into her Mandalorian heritage, because it's briefly mentioned that she lost her whole family in the Empire's bombings on Mandalore. The fact that that is briefly mentioned and not a bigger part of Sabine's emotional state and arc is ridiculous in of itself. So the issue with how they know where Thrawn is was fixed. Morgan Elsbeth is a Night Sister and the Great Mother's called to her through the stars. It makes sense and adds more to Dathomir and the Night Sister witches lore. Plus, I think that the witches are a great introduction to the Night Sisters if you haven't watched Clone Wars or Rebels. In my opinion, most of the performances still aren't brilliant. Rosario Dawson gets better and Ray Stevenson is fantastic as Baylan Skoll. Everyone else except Thrawn could be better. Ezra is still a character I don't like and I'm not sold on his live action performance. Sabine just seems flat all the time, and when she was reunited with Ezra it felt like a really emotionless and anticlimactic moment. Hera is alright, and Shin Hati's actress isn't given much to work with, but she does her best. But Thrawn. Oh, Thrawn. Lars Mikkelsen still delivers his lines so perfectly, and he's so collected and precise in his decisions and why he's making them. And then there's Hayden Christensen back as Anakin Skywalker. I will admit, the Clone Wars stuff was extremely cool to see. Ariana Greenblatt was great as Jan Ahsoka, but my problem with all that stuff is, it doesn't contribute much, if anything, to the story or Ahsoka's journey. I've seen people say it is to help Ahsoka let go of the guilt of letting Anakin become Vader, but if that is the case, a conversation between the two would have been suffice. Something like we got in Kenobi. They just talked about their decisions and why they made them and how they feel about each other now and stuff like that. I would feel something if it was a conversation, not this stupid lesson of live or die, because it doesn't make sense to me. I didn't feel anything because Ahsoka's development is tied up in this stupid flashback sort of sequence to give fans something they want. And yet, Ahsoka comes out of it smiling and wearing white as if she's changed. But I can't tell, other than her outfit, if there has been any change at all. Vader transitions were cool, but there's cooler stuff in Star Wars, let's not get ahead of ourselves. One other thing, imagine you're my dad or my uncle watching this show. You wouldn't understand what is even going on in these flashback sequences. Thrawn is introduced as if you don't know who he is. You understand why he was banished, why he is a threat. You don't need to have watched Rebels to know that. But with Clone Wars, you do. You can't just appeal to the fans, you have to appeal to the general audience as well. And fan service, like this, just doesn't. Therefore, your audience doesn't grow, you don't make more money. Your audience shouldn't need to watch 11 seasons combined of 2 shows of a different name to understand why something is cool. Not everyone has the time for that and they just want to watch the new stuff like my dad and my uncle. However, one moment, like Anakin's Force Ghost appearing at the end, is perfect. Doesn't waste loads of time, doesn't impact the story, just a master watching over his apprentice in death. And it works because we've seen and had mentions of Anakin outside of the world between worlds, which I still don't understand how that works. I'm complaining a lot, so here's a positive before we end the video. The cliffhanger ending. I love that our main hero gets trapped in another galaxy and our villain escapes to start the first steps to restoring the Empire. And Dathomir in live action, I know that it will look amazing. and non-hardcore fans and audience members will get a good understanding of what the planet is like, I'm sure. I can't wait to see it. And so we've reached the end. I appreciate that this show exists. I appreciate that it tried something new by introducing a separate galaxy to the one we know and love. I love that Thrawn looks like a big threat. I just wish the scripts were tidied up a bit and performances were a bit better. If you feel like I've missed anything, feel free to comment and I'll reply with my thoughts. But Ahsoka Season 1 for now gets a 6 out of 10. May the Force be with you all, always.